Hey, it's John. Welcome back to my channel. And if you clicked on this video, I assume you're taking a quick break from all the work you've been doing at home and have fallen down a rabbit hole of all things coronavirus related, convinced that the outside world is no longer inhabitable and the only thing standing between the corona zombies and the mountain of toilet paper you've hoarded is a moat filled with flaming hand sanitizer that you're planning on digging as soon as you can manage to find the time. So good luck with that. But in the meantime, I'd like to share my concerns about the future of Amtrak, given all the crazy changes to everyday life that have happened in just the past couple of weeks. So how did we get here? Well, the story starts back in May of 2018 when former Amtrak CEO Joe Boardman, who was highly regarded as being the CEO that served the second longest, wrote a letter to Railway Age sounding the alarm that the new CEO of Amtrak had his mind set on terminating the long-distance trains. This new CEO, Richard Anderson, just so happened to be a former executive chairman of Delta Airlines and had strong opinions about how Amtrak should refocus itself going forward. Pointing out the perceived deficiencies such as unprofitability and low percentage of end-to-end riders, Anderson even hinted that the long-distance trains may be suspended under the guise of safety until the host railroads had completed implementation of positive train control. The new model that Mr. Anderson is promoting resembles a point-to-point model used by airlines and would see the majority of long-distance train routes abandoned in favor of shorter routes, less than 400 miles in length, between large metropolitan areas. Of course, despite Amtrak's very small market share of cross-country travel, this could be seen as an anti-competitive gift to his buddies in the airline industry, but that's just wild speculation on my part. But I can see his point. Shorter distance runs do make sense when there's a higher frequency of service. For example, no business traveler in Salt Lake City is going to elect to take the California Zephyr to a meeting in San Francisco because the train departs at 11:30 at night and doesn't arrive until the next afternoon. On the contrary, a Acela service on the Northeast Corridor is quite attractive to business travelers. Outside of the 1977 movie Silver Streak, the vast majority of riders on the long-distance trains are people traveling for pleasure. That alone is indicative of an underlying desire in this country to travel by train. Since Amtrak's inception, anti-passenger rail politicians have been trying to shut it down. However, this is the first time in its history that a push to cut the routes has come from within the company. To add to the irony, the methods they're using to achieve it are the same methods which led to the creation of Amtrak in the first place. The new administration of Amtrak, under the guise of pushing the company towards profitability, has made cuts in service such as retiring dining cars on the Lakeshore Limited and Silver Star to intentionally degrade the service and lower ridership. Amtrak was formed in response to railroads degrading their passenger trains through poor on-time performance, use of outdated and poorly maintained equipment, and overall poor service because the railroads, which were mandated by law to provide passenger service, wanted to have as few people ride it as possible, so the federal government would allow them to discontinue the services. So aside from Amtrak actively working against itself, 2020 is also the year of Amtrak's reauthorization by Congress. In February, President Trump released his budget proposal that cut funding for the long-distance train routes from $1.3 billion to $611 million. Now, if history is anything to go on, and considering that the Democratic Party now has a majority in the House of Representatives, one can reasonably infer that the final budget will provide more funding for the long-distance routes. But, given how many trillions of dollars have just evaporated from the U.S. economy in the past couple of weeks, many aspects of the federal budget may be adjusted to cope with the loss of tax revenue, not just Amtrak. I mean, where are all those stimulus checks going to come from? Only time will tell. So in addition to Amtrak and the President and Senate working to cut the long-distance trains, let's talk for a moment about the actual state of Amtrak's rolling stock. The average age of Amtrak's rolling stock is currently older than it was when Amtrak was formed in 1970. Given that the private railroads intentionally deferred replacement of outdated equipment in order to save money and drive down ridership, this fact speaks to how little the government has invested in Amtrak. Compared with the Federal Aviation Administration covering 90% of infrastructure costs at major American airports, a few new cars doesn't seem like that big a deal. In fact, compared with the $15 billion bailout of the airlines in 2001 and the rumored $50 billion bailout now, even the Gateway program seems like a bargain. But regardless of all that, Amtrak's rolling stock is in bad shape. Excluding the Talgos and the California cars and the Acelas, which is funny enough that the people that pass the laws can figure out how to upgrade the trains they actually ride, and without even mentioning the hot garbage that is the P-42, the core of their car fleet are the Am fleets, the Superliners, both Series 1 and 2, the Horizon cars, and the Viewliners. The Superliners and the Viewliners are basically used exclusively on long-distance trains. Both sets of cars are showing their age big time, with the Superliner 1s being introduced in 1979. For those keeping track at home, that's 1 year after the Boeing 707 ceased production. Even when money is provided for new cars, though, the process of designing something that can withstand a collision with a loaded freight train can be disastrous. So where is all this going? Well, the Federal Railroad Administration has continued to enact more and more stringent design specifications that drive up the cost of railcar production that have long precluded the manufacturing of new models of Amtrak's current railcar fleet, regardless of whether or not that fleet is still in service. Now, this isn't without merit. Amtrak has, for various reasons, maintained an abysmal safety record, which has seen the repeated failings of their rolling stock in collisions and derailments. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that if Amtrak's trains stop running for any considerable length of time, couldn't a simple safety directive or rules change mean that the superliners or AM fleets are no longer safe enough to carry passengers? I don't think it's out of the question. So with Amtrak in an already precarious position in February of 2020, could it get any worse? As always, the answer to that question is yes, it could get a whole lot worse. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020, regardless of the number of people killed, is a historically significant moment. Not since World War II has American daily life been so dramatically affected in such a short amount of time. The week of March 9th saw drastic changes affecting nearly every facet of American society, from international travel to buying groceries. Delta Airlines, that's the same Delta Airlines that Amtrak's current CEO used to work for, was the first to announce dramatic cuts to service and a grounding of a third of their entire fleet. American Airlines followed suit a day later, announcing that they would park nearly their entire wide-body fleet due to a cut in international capacity of 75%. The worldwide pandemic is highlighting the fragility of the commercial air industry at a brutally fast rate. It is widely speculated that restrictions on domestic travel may be announced shortly in America to help slow the spread of the disease. I would not be at all surprised to see at least a temporary suspension of some, if not all, of Amtrak's long-distance trains, if for no other reason than that they've already lost hundreds of millions of dollars due to a 50% drop in bookings and a 300% increase in cancellations. Northeast Corridor service has been reduced by 60%, with most corridor services nationwide reverting to a Saturday schedule. Heck, even just today, Amtrak announced they're shutting down the entire Keystone Corridor. How long these suspensions may last will only be known with some time. Now to the point of this video. As I've outlined, before the COVID-19 pandemic, Amtrak's long-distance trains were in trouble. Terrible on-time performance, which isn't all Amtrak's fault, management working to degrade the service, the American government attempting to defund their operation, and an old and tired rolling stock fleet, which could theoretically be deemed too unsafe to continue using, as the current CEO threatened with PTC. And it's no wonder why Amtrak's long-distance trains are seen as a pariah, particularly when compared with airline travel. With the outbreak of COVID-19, however, and the prospect of domestic travel restrictions, their outlook, at least in my opinion, seems far bleaker. Now, this is getting into conspiracy territory, and I'm certainly not in railroad upper management, but consider the case of the Sunset Limited. After Hurricane Katrina, service east of New Orleans was suspended indefinitely due to the line being washed out by the storm. CSX, the host railroad, rebuilt the line, but claimed that it was too expensive to rebuild to passenger standards. Keep in mind that Amtrak took the burden of running passenger trains away from the private railroads, but the agreement was that Amtrak trains would run on the same tracks, at the same speeds, and be given dispatching priority, all for the low cost of shedding the money-losing passenger trains. With time, however, opinions change, and what seemed like a bargain to railroads in 1970 is viewed as a burden in 2020. Amtrak is not always given priority by railroad dispatchers, and their on-time performance is proof of that. If CSX can weasel a way out of a contract to run Amtrak simply because they don't feel like it, other Class 1s can too. I'm not saying this is a foregone conclusion, but just imagine if Amtrak were to suspend service on the California Zephyr in the next week or two. On-time performance west of Denver is particularly bad, due in part to the constraints of the crowded line through the Moffat Tunnel. Is it totally out of the realm of possibility that Union Pacific could just release a new timetable lowering the top speed from 79 to 70? Or 60? I don't think so. The lesson of the Sunset Limited is that once the trains stop running, they don't come back. Where's the Desert Wind? Or the Pioneer? Now, this is all, of course, speculation by an ill-informed man in flyover country, but I brought up these points because any one of these reasons could be used either by Amtrak or the government, under any pretext they can come up with, to end service on the long-distance trains. As I said before, I understand Richard Anderson's logic of how to bring Amtrak into profitability, but I don't agree that it'll be successful given Amtrak's current state. Just think logistically, if the Southwest Chief or Empire Builder gets cut, how would Amtrak move equipment across the country? For that matter, what if all 4 West Coast trains get cut? Would the freight railroads really be interested in accommodating non-revenue Amtrak trains on their system when they were so unaccommodating before? And if they did let Amtrak run across their system, who would run the trains? Despite locomotive controls being similar between passenger and freight units, freight railroads wouldn't let their employees handle Amtrak's high voltage connections and would have zero interest in training their employees to do so. Given the failure of the Hoosier State, which was a relatively easy route to privatize considering its short length and connection to Chicago, how would these new routes be established? With all the pressures on freight railroads, who are currently attempting to deal with a decrease in traffic while implementing their own versions of precision scheduled railroading, while simultaneously working to reduce train crews to 1 person, are they really going to be willing to negotiate a new passenger operating contract? I don't think so. Consider this video as a cautionary tale. I'm not convinced that Amtrak's long-distance trains are going to be cut, but I also never thought I'd see empty grocery store shelves. I do know that the rate at which things are changing because of the coronavirus, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Thanks a lot for watching, stay healthy, and I will see you all soon.